Well, hello. Happy to be here today talking at Crops TV. My name is John Swanson, and I'm going to be talking today about the Batch and Build program, which for us has really been a new model for conservation. The Batch and Build program has really gained a lot of wildfire as it's spread across the state and now the Midwest, and I'm excited to talk to you about it today. Uh, but before I dive in too far, a little bit about who I am. Again, my name is John Swanson. I work for Polk County in central Iowa. And I am a conservationist at heart. I've been spending the last 15 years working with farmers, working with landowners, even working with cities, doing water quality, flood control, all different types of conservation. And as I sometimes lay around in wet areas of farm fields, like in the picture, and I think a lot about what we can do to get more conservation on the ground. And now I'm lucky enough to lead a team of conservationists, and we do just that. We focus on working with people to put conservation on the ground. And that's kind of the story I'm going to be sharing with everyone today is the story of Batch and Build. And if you take it a step further, you think about here in the heart of Iowa, Polk County is right there in the middle. Um, and I'm working for Polk County, which is kind of unique. Like, why is the county involved in conservation, or why are we involved with working with farmers and landowners? Well, that story really goes to if you look at Polk County and you look at the streams coming to us, we really have water coming from all directions. We got the Des Moines River, the Raccoon River, we have numerous priority watersheds, and our county really prioritized water quite a few years ago and saying, how can we do our parts to clean up the water, to reduce flooding, to work with our agriculture partners, to work with our cities, to work with our residents of the county? And we're really challenged every day to figure out how can we get conservation on the ground. And it's really a fun environment to try new things. And specifically, when you talk about Polk County, you also think what's upstream of us, heavy agriculture, the Des Moines lobe, a wet, nutrient-rich habitat draining down into those watersheds and coming down to us. And we know on that landscape that there's a lot of buffers. We do a lot of work with CRP and getting landowners to put vegetated buffers on the landscape. But we also know that there's a lot of nutrients and nitrates specifically coming off of that Des Moines lobe landscape. And as we were looking at these buffers, we also acknowledged that that tile landscape that's draining our farm fields is coming into those waterways. And unfortunately, even if we have those vegetative buffers in place, where there's tile, we have nutrients and nitrates traveling underneath those buffers and getting into our waterways. So we really have been looking into how can we put edge of field practices on the ground, specifically saturated buffers and bioreactors. And that's kind of what we're going to mainly focus on during this presentation is just those practices. And to start with, if you don't know, saturated buffers, they are an edge of field practice that is intended to treat tile drainage. And if you speak generally about saturated buffers, what they're treating is usually like 4-inch to 10-inch size tile outlets. They usually have between 15 and 60 acre drainage areas. And as you see that diagram there, it's rather simple in function in that tile comes into that vegetated buffer area. It hits what we call a water control box and then gets diverted into these distribution lines. And those distribution lines push the water through actually the soils of the stream banks. And those soils interact with the nitrates and give us the nutrient reduction we're looking for. And we also know that these saturated buffers also have an overflow. So those soils can only soak in and filter the water so fast. So when we get bigger rain events and those tiles really start running full, they will also bypass the distribution lines and go out the regular tile outlets. And that's really designed to make sure we don't cause wet spots up in the fields because we don't want to impact the adjacent crop fields that drain into the tile. Some of the benefits and some of the reasons I personally love saturated buffers is they're a very simple practice. They have a long lifespan. You're really just putting this water control box in the ground. You're putting these distribution lines out there. And this saturated buffer is going to be underground, doing its job day in and day out for years and years to come. The minimum lifespan that we have set on these is 10 years, and that's what the maintenance agreement holds to. But we expect these to be on the landscape for decades once they're installed. And we really only need a 30-foot stream buffer of vegetation along the edge of the stream. And if you have 30 foot, you can fit in one of these saturated buffers. And installation costs are relatively low for a practice that's going to be there for a long time. Usually between $3,000 and $5,000 is what you're looking at to install a saturated buffer on a single tile outlet. And at the end of the day, This saturated buffer is most regularly going to get you a 50 to 60% nitrate reduction of all the water that gets flows into those distribution pipes. Now, while saturated buffers are a great practice, they don't fit everywhere. A great example of that is if the topography is too steep or if you have too much water coming into them, they're not going to be able to manage large drainage areas. So another practice we look at is bioreactors. So very similar, bioreactors, they are underground. In its simplest form, we dig up a pit and we fill it with wood chips and then we cover it back up. And unlike the saturated buffers that utilize native black topsoil to get the nitrate reductions, in this case, the wood chips offer the carbon material that the bacteria and the different processes rely on to sequester those nitrates and remove them out of the water. Again, some of these benefits are it's underground, it does its job. You don't even know it's there. If you ever go to a saturated buffer or a bioreactor field day, honestly, prepare to be a little disappointed because there's not much to look at. They're literally underground, and all you see is one or two of these metal boxes sticking out of the ground. Now, a little bit different than saturated buffers. You can see on average, they're going to treat a little bit bigger drainage area, 40 to 100, even in some cases, well over 100-acre drainage area. But they do have a real lifespan to them that's we generally have been seeing 15 to 20 years, and that is the time at which it takes for those wood chips to break down. Eventually, that bioreactor is going to have to be redug up, and new wood chips are going to have to be placed within the pit. Installation costs are a little bit higher there, 10 to 20,000, depending on the size of the bioreactor, and very similar 50 to 60% nitrate load reductions for bioreactors. But again, with our mindset of, hey, we and a lot of places have these buffers, riparian buffers already in place. Could we couple saturated buffers and bioreactors with them to make sure we're using that same area to treat our tile water and remove those nitrates? And again, if you have a 30-foot buffer, you're almost guaranteed to have enough space for either a saturated buffer or a bioreactor. The problem, and I always joke, if it was easy, anyone would do it. So, all right, if these things are so simple, if they go in underground, they don't take up much space. We're probably getting a lot of them in the ground, aren't we? Well, I can tell you, uh, we haven't been getting a lot in the ground, and it hasn't been from a lack of effort. So, as I kind of rewind time, if you're going back to me in 2015 through 2020, we were working in these watersheds in Polk County. We were doing all the traditional things. We were sending out letters, we were doing field days, we were assessing farms. We were really trying to get these practices on the ground, which back in 2015, they were very new practices. And unfortunately, over that 5-year period, we only installed 4 saturated buffers and 2 bioreactors. And to be honest, I still remember the year that we installed 2 practices, and I was like, "Oh man, we got this now. It's we're on the uphill. We got this. We're gonna really start kicking into gear." But it just never really kicked into gear. Uh, and to put perspective in one of our watershed plans in 4 Mile Creek, which is the center watershed on this map, our goal was to actually treat 100 tile outlets. And we're like, man, we started really looking at what we were doing. And we were even at that time offering 100% cost share. And it just wasn't getting practices in the ground. Maybe it really wasn't about the money. And that's some of the questions we started asking ourselves. So again, like, what was the problem? Well, the real problems, we started asking some of those questions. And I always joke with my team, like we got to get to a point where we can ask people, like, really, what would it take to get you to install these practices? And we had some landowners and farmers we knew really well, and we started just talking about, like, what are your thoughts about these and what are we doing wrong here? And some of the things we learned were, again, these are relatively new practices, even though now and today they've been around for quite a while, but it wasn't that long ago. And in some parts of the state and some parts of the country, they're very new practices. A lot of misunderstandings around rules, like can you install them in CRP? Can you not? What programs can you utilize funding for? Where do they work exactly? Very commonly, we'd walk a farm with a farmer, and the conversation would go around all different types of conservation. We'd see a goalie in a field. And we're like, oh, we talk about waterways. We talk about infield practices like cover crops. Um, and many of the practices that we kept falling back to were those that we saw a significant immediate benefit to the farm. So like an example would be when you fix erosion, that's very mutually beneficial. But when you're saying, let's just treat your tile water, that usually is, and honestly looks crystal clear, it just kept falling behind other conservation practices. And then we started looking, seeing like even the farmers and landowners that we got to the finish line, they were having trouble finding contractors. Usually these are installed by tiling contractors, and to be honest, they didn't want to stop what they were doing to install a single saturated buffer for 3,500 bucks or a bioreactor even for $10,000. And then again, we just kept looking and kind of talking about what's going on, and we're like, well, we're offering to pay for all of it. And the landowners are kind of like, we're asking, really, this doesn't benefit their farm. It doesn't improve yields. It doesn't fix a problem on the farm. We're really asking landowners to do this to really just help downstream water quality. And then we came to the realization too that, well, everyone's also getting taxed. Even if we offer 100% cost share, they're going to get 1099 at the end of the year for all of those dollars that went to them for the installation. But at the end of the day, we also kind of contributed to what we call the hassle factor. And that would be like people like me going to a landowner and sharing about these practices and say they were like, yeah, I'd be interested in installing this. And we're like, all right, well, it may take us about a year to put a design together. And you're like, wow, a year's a long time, but maybe they make it through that. And they're like, all right, well, we're going to cover all the costs, but you got to hire the contractor. And they're like, okay, well, that I can work with that, but they can't find a contractor, but maybe by chance they do. And they hire the contractor and they have to front all the money to install, and then they have to wait several months for their reimbursement. And then at the end of the day, they get taxed on the funding that they used to install this practice that didn't help their field. You can imagine that sounds great. That sounds like a hassle. That's a difficult sell, and that's why we weren't getting ones in the ground. And so, like many ideas happen, a chance meeting came together, and the birth of what we now call the batch and build was discussed at this lunch meeting. And this lunch meeting was held with a local watershed coordinator, an SWCD commissioner, and a local ag business leader. And they had this idea. And this idea was, what if we, instead of kind of waiting for people to come to us and doing field days and doing all the stuff that everyone else is doing, or even um, talking about all different kinds of conservation practices, what if we just targeted just saturated buffers and bioreactors? What if we really focused on figuring out where these could work and actually bringing it to the landowner? And what if we came up with a different funding model that didn't require the landowner to front all the money, didn't require them to get taxed? What if we just didn't do traditional cost share? And then like the what ifs just kept going. Like, okay, what if we, okay, let's target them. Let's figure out a different way to manage the money. Let's group sites together so we can speed up design, get contractors more interested. Like, what if we installed, the idea this first year was, what if we got like 25 at once? I bet contractors would be more interested. I bet designers would be able to focus more effort on it. And then let's like bid out a different size groupings to figure out like how do you actually install these in a group. And then the last one was like, okay, so we're asking landowners to install these for the greater good of someone downstream. What if we even provided some type of incentive payment to them? And soon after this, like oftentimes happens, that watershed coordinator took another job, and I was lucky enough to basically be in the same office. Like, this is a good idea. Like, what if we did some of these things? And that's what brought us to batch and build. And I'll kind of explain the process, because to me, batch and build is a process, and it's a process that can be applied to many practices. But again, for today's presentation, we're talking about, okay, let's think about saturated buffers and bioreactors. Let's talk about this process. And so it all starts with targeting. So for me as a young conservationist, I was always taught for years, don't target people, don't bring it to them. Really, like it should be more natural than that. You should wait for them to come to you. You should do general education. But for the first time, we're like, you know what? Let's actually map out where these practices work. So we used a mapping tool. We actually identified in our priority watershed all the spots where saturated buffers should work. We then created a list of landowners, and people keep telling me not to call it a hit list, but I'm like, this is our hit list of landowners. This is the list of people that we want to interact with, that we think this will work in their field. Let's create a list. It's 25 landowners. These are the landowners we want to get in their fields, and we want to see if this will work. We want to work with them. And then we came with an idea that we're going to send them a letter, and we're going to have someone make a follow-up phone call a week later. And that letter is going to say, like, we've identified your field. We want to survey it. We just want to see if a saturated buffer would work, or a bioreactor if a saturated buffer didn't work. And we then sent those letters. We made the follow-up phone calls, and we had a very simple ask on that phone call, which is, can we have permission to survey your land? And let's see how it goes. The other thing that we knew from past experience was, It's really hard for farmers and landers whenever the time they call the government who's supposed to be here to help and they get a different person they talk to every time, or they get passed from one government employee to another. It can just get really confusing and it can become a hassle really quick. So that first year, we had this idea that every landowner would be assigned a project manager. And that project manager would be the only person they ever have to talk to. That project manager may not always know the answer, but they can go find out the answer. And so we assign, and here's a couple of examples of actual. There's Ruth, there's Keegan, there's Tanner. Those are real project managers, and each of them had their landowners that they representative. And lo and behold, that first year, what do you know? But that simple targeting and that outreach strategy, it worked. Uh, that first year, we got permission and eventually surveyed 130 outlets back in 2020. And you'll see some of our numbers there. The next year, we surveyed 200 outlets. And then we actually, our numbers dropped because we started learning about what sites actually are worth surveying and which ones aren't. But when we asked, people said, yeah, you know what? I actually really appreciate that you did your homework and you're calling me for a reason. And it was overwhelmingly positive, this targeting. And so then we actually had to get out there and we had to learn how to survey. And we had to learn, we knew how to survey, but we didn't know how to survey 100 sites. So now that we've honed it in, we've really standardized the survey process. And we also have a coding system where every tile that we survey, when you survey 100 tiles, you got to keep track of those tiles from the day one when you survey it all the way to when you construct it. So my name is John Swanson. If you're on my farm, the first tile is JS-1. And then if we find another tile on that farm, JS-2. And that really helped us keep all of our tile surveys straight. But for each of those sites, we do a topographic survey. We do a soil test to see if the soils are will work for a saturated buffer. We Maverick, you can see in the bottom picture that we actually build a tile profile to figure out how deep it is to make sure if we put something on it, we're not going to back water up into it. And even that first year, we did a nitrate sample on every outlet that we surveyed. And for design, we've always had a mindset of a saturated buffer first, bioreactor second. And we do that because of the reduced cost and the longer lifespan. And that's just been kind of our personal uh, process. They're also a lot easier to install, not having to worry about recharge in the future. But others have done it differently. But we'll generally see like one or both will work, and sometimes we'll give the landowner the option of which they would like. But after we get this survey done, we go back to the landowner for our second touch. And that's basically presenting them like, okay, we surveyed 10 outlets in your field. 6 of those could be saturated buffers, 2 could be bioreactors, and 2 of them maybe don't work for either. And that's where they get to decide what would they like to have in their field. The second part is we knew that we really had to speed up the design process. It just doesn't work if it takes you a year to design one practice. And so by this idea, once we had 100 surveys together, we really could focus our time with how to speed up the design. And in that first year, we actually did about 90 feasibilities in about a 6-month period. And then we did a whole bunch of designs very quick after that. And I'll touch on that in a minute. But again, you got to really focus. A landowner, if they have to sit for a year, that's just a long time for them to have to wait. Now, the next part really had to do with a funding model. Now, we knew we wanted to do the funding a little bit different. We knew we wanted to group sites together, and we just wanted to simplify it for landowners. And a lot of the landowners that we worked with, they're like, yeah, it was like an easy button for us. Like, why wouldn't we do it? And that's because I'd say one of the most important pieces of this program has been this new funding model. So I'll throw a slide up. Talk about a busy, difficult slide to look at, but this is how we were doing cost share previously. So you see the landowners, they're there in the middle. A lot of times we were stacking different funding together to get cost share to 100%. So in some cases we had state IDOLS funding. In some cases we had federal NRCS funding. In other cases we had some local money we're going to kick in. So to get all those, each of those programs have paperwork. So the landowner has to, in the letters in red, they have to sign up, or the arrows in red, they have to sign up for those different paperworks. They then have to hire the contractor and they have to pay the contractor. And then they have to submit their payments to the funders to get reimbursed. And what I see when I see this busy slide is that's a lot of work for the landowner. And to be honest, one of the things I've learned the most is in today's day, a lot of these landowners are very busy folks. A lot of times they're the farmers. A lot of times they have another off the farm job. A lot of times they're just trying to get their kids to soccer practice at night. And the more you can make the process convenient for them, the easier it's going to be to get practices on the ground. So we developed what we now call the fiscal agent funding model. And that is a slide with a lot of words on it, no pretty pictures, but the basics are we treat these installations more like a public improvement project. Just like the county can build a road, we can build a whole bunch of saturated buffers. The county operates as a central fiscal agent. So whether it's state money or federal money or private donor, any money we get, the county puts all those funding together. We don't make the landowner, they don't touch that money. We have our own agreements with those partners. The landowners don't have to sign up and they don't have to manage that money. We then utilize the funding to publicly bid out the project. So then if we have all the money, it may be on 10 different farms, but we'll hire one contractor or more, but we'll hire the contractor. And then all that the landowner has to sign up for is a temporary construction easement that lets the county and our contractor come onto their property. And this is where we've ended up incentivizing landowners. So if we're asking a landowner to install a practice, we actually offer $1,000 easement payments per outlet that we treat. So if a landowner installs 10 practices, we actually pay them $10,000 to install these on their property. But our hope was that first year is that we would actually save enough money by grouping together installs and lowering costs that we would actually still break even. And that did actually turn out to be the case. The second form the landowner had to sign was a 10-year maintenance agreement. So when construction's over and the county leaves, that saturated buffer is they own it. It's their saturated buffer, just like it's their tile outlets. And the fiscal agent no longer has any responsibility for the management or the maintenance of that practice. But the beauty of this is the landowner never has to touch any of the construction money. They don't have to hire the contractor. We, the public agency, we take care of that, and there's no tax implications for them. So there you have our new slide that shows the flow of the money. And you can look at this and be like, well, that looks just as busy as the last one. But what's most important here is what does the landowner have to do? And they're right there in blue again. And all they have is basically two agreements with the fiscal agent. And the fiscal agent, we do all the agreements with the funding programs and we bid out the work to the contractor and we take a lot of the work off of the landowner. We just simplify it for them. But at the end of the day, batch and build, all this work, and to be honest, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for the conservationists because we're taking on the hiring, we're taking on the survey, the design. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for the landowner. It's a lot of work for us, and that work's really only worth it if you see results. And that's been the beauty of this program is we've seen results. So if you recall, beginning of the presentation, we installed 6 structures in 5 years between 2015 and 2020. That first year, we installed 51 structures. We then replicated the process. The next year, we installed 85 structures and we expanded into Story County. The next year after that, we installed 63 structures and we expanded into Dallas and Boone counties. And now maybe the most exciting part is as we sit today, there are actually batch and build programs impacting 22 Iowa counties and 4 states across the Midwest. But there's been a few major takeaways that I think are just as important than just the number of practices we get in the ground. And that has been this idea that's been just our whole team has really understood this mindset of if we're going to come into a field and we're going to treat a tile outlet, we should treat every tile outlet that is appropriate to treat. So we can come into a field, we can install practices to treat all those tiles, get it all done, and never have to come back again and move on to the neighbor's field and move on and on and on. This idea of a bundling approach or grouping, we saw that grouping positively impact outreach, survey, design, and construction. Everyone saw all these benefits that when you group together a whole bunch of practices, it just made everything work smoother. We did dabble a couple years into hiring engineers to do our design. We also worked some years with NRCS to do our design. And now we do most of our designs in-house with Polk County staff. Consultant engineers can do your designs, but they are costly. And that when you want to install a saturated buffer as inexpensively as possible, if you're adding an average cost for us $2,000 to the installation just for the design, it does add up quickly. We also did a cost analysis from that first batch, and we saw that we saved $115,000, which counteracted the $50,000 in easement payments that we provided to the landowners. And the beauty of it is this idea of targeting, bundling, group installs. We've now applied it to other practices. And some folks have given us a little grief and like, well, you shouldn't just be talking about saturated buffers and bioreactors. But when you're out in these fields, all different other practices do come up. And we've done wetlands, we've done cover crops, all these other things. It's really about building a relationship. And whether you do that by installing a saturated buffer first, it's going to turn into other things. And now we've even taken a lot of these lessons learned from batch and build, and we've applied it to quite a few other practices. And to be honest, it just keeps working. We keep seeing our numbers go up. We keep seeing the landowners wanting to work with us. The numbers go up, and it just keeps building on top of each other. But as I've sat here and I've helped now quite a few other counties try and do batch and builds, the single thing that has related to either the success or failure of a batch and build project has to do with that county's ability to build a team. And the team really is who's going to do the outreach? Who are your project managers? Who's going to do the designs? Who's going to do your landowner outreach? Who's going to be your fiscal agent? And to be honest, one organization could do all of those things, but most commonly it's a team approach where you have multiple people helping out with those different roles. And those teams that really figure out a way to work together, they've been very successful. Versus if you do outreach to a landowner and you call them and say, we're going to survey your field, we're going to figure out what works, and we're going to get back to you in a few months, in 3 months. If you don't get back to them in 3 months, you start losing credibility. And you have to keep your credibility with landowners and farmers, and you have to show them that you're really on top of what you're proposing to them. But all in all, if you think the batch and build, it turned out to be actually a much slower process than what I thought we could do. I was like, this is gonna be fast. To be honest, it isn't fast, but it is methodical and it is clear about what the next step is. And so this is our tried and true method now for saturated buffers and bioreactors, and it starts with year one, ahead of spring field work. We're doing outreach in February and March. We're getting permission to survey. Then March through June, we're actually getting out and we're surveying those say 100 sites. And then June and July, we're taking all of those surveys, we're completing design feasibility, and we're having a follow-up meeting with the landowner who last talked to us back in February, March. Then we're sitting down with them, we're sitting at their kitchen table, we're presenting what would work and how the funding would work and how the process is. And the second they say yes, we move into the full design and we do our conservation planning, we do all of our cultural resources and environmental work. And our goal is between August and January to get all of our designs done. And then the third and final touch with landowner, and really a lot of landowners, they only need to talk to us 3 times. Some talk to us every week, but the final touch is around February, that second year. So a year after, you're sitting down with every landowner, you're showing them the final designs, you're getting them to sign the easements, to sign the maintenance agreements, you're getting everything in writing and approved. And then we're bidding out the projects March through April. And then May, construction starts. And this is for us generally installing at least 50 projects at once. And we start construction. And now the awesome thing that we keep doing is once you're kind of in year 2 of the process, you start year 1 of the next year's project. So that's how we've each year have had new projects going, because now these projects start rolling in conjunction with each other. And as I wrap things up, it's a lot of information. But for me, batch and build is really about this process and putting it all together. And this process is not that complicated, but it is different. It's different than the way I learned to do private lands conservation. But to be honest, it's been eye-opening for me. And this is how I want to do private lands conservation for every program that we do. And it basically is, we build a team. Everyone knows what their role is on the team, and it is the outreach person, the designer, the money manager. We target practice locations. So whether it's a saturated buffer, whether it's a wetland, whether it's cover crops, we actually target where do we think these are going to be our best bets. And then we methodically outreach to the owners of the land that those practices should work on. And we bring the conservation to them. We literally call them and say, we want to work with you. And this is what we think will work in your field. Help us figure out if it really works. We then get away from traditional cost share and we utilize this fiscal agent where we treat it like a public improvement. We build the conservation just like we build a road. And lastly, we install them in groupings. And some practices you can install in groupings, like wetlands. Wetlands are generally, they can be very big, but you can use all the first steps to get you to installation. But there's a lot of practices you can install in a grouping. And at the end of the day, it's been a very positive experience, and we've seen it just keep working in each county that we go to. It's been just a great experience. And with that, I'll wrap up and say thank you for listening. There's a picture of my cute little girls swimming in the water, because what are we doing if we're not trying to clean up our water? And this is a great mechanism. And if you haven't heard of Batch and Build, just Google it and you'll find all types of information. So thank you all.